Why else would you set a venue on fire or fire bullets into it if someone hasn't done what you want, but you haven't told them what you want?
It is one of the most serious affronts to law and order that I can remember happening in Australia, because it verges on anarchy.
The cartel sent this message and it says, "Hello, if you got this message, we're after you, your family, your businesses, homes and souls."
I'm Andrew Rule, this is Life and Crimes. Melbourne has been gripped by a siege, a series of attacks on our bars and pubs and clubs and restaurants and various other venues, which is interesting in itself. And we're wondering what it should be called. And my guest, or our guest here today, is our in-house crime reporter, Olivia Jenkins. Do you call it pub wars or bar wars, or what do you call it, Olivia?
Well, as we were just saying, bar wars is probably a little bit catchier and probably more broadly encompasses the types of venues, which, as you mentioned, do include bars and restaurants, but they also include strip clubs, and people have gone to other people's houses who are connected to that scene as well. So
bar picks up most of it, one way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah, all sorts. And look, let's not milk it for laughs, but there's been some fairly broad application of arson in Melbourne in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And one of them, is a car dealership in South Melbourne, I think it was. There's various other things, but whether they are all in fact connected, we don't know. This is the great mystery, is it not?
That's the really interesting thing, is that because no one, not even the police, seem to know who the main source of these arson attacks are. We know who are committing them, and they're allegedly kids. Some of them are as young as 14.
Yep.
But the problem with the hierarchy and how that criminal structure works now is it's all going through encrypted apps that essentially look like Airtasker, where someone can just post a listing for a job and a 14-year-old kid can pick that up and say, yep, I'll set that Docklands restaurant on fire, no worries. So the problem that police have is that they don't actually know who the sort of lower level foot soldiers are.
Because they don't know.
Exactly, they don't know.
No one knows nothing.
That's right.
And that's the big problem. And therefore it's quite possible, and possibly it's likely, that there are people squaring up for old grievances by lighting fires or getting fires lit who have nothing to do with some of the other people who are lighting fires. That there might be, people just getting even with somebody that they don't like, because under the umbrella of all this business, it'll get lost in the mix.
Well, that's right. They might think that they're sort of safe, for want of a better word, because as we saw in the tobacco wars, that sort of created a new blueprint for how criminals want to send a message to rivals or to someone who's not doing what they want. But one of the key differences that police are telling us between what we saw with the tobacco wars and now is that we ultimately knew where the source of those attacks and the arsons were coming from, and it was from Kaz Hamad, who is now in custody in Iraq. But the difference and what the problem is that police are telling us is that they don't know if it's one group, if it's multiple groups, is it bikie linked, is it drug related, is it something to do with the illegal alcohol market. They're still trying to work that out, and they're telling us that, to quote, everything is on the table.
Yeah, it's a mystery until it's not, and the police for a while will be flailing around, I imagine, until they get some sort of breakthrough. Now, of course, Olivia, there's nothing new about the big picture, the strategy, not the tactics. The tactics have altered, but the strategy is the same essentially as 100 years ago in America with Prohibition, when the likes of Lucky Luciano and Al Capone and Dutch Schultz and all these famous mobsters who are long gone, they stood over proprietors and bar owners and so forth in those days. They ran bootleg alcohol into America, which was, of course, had prohibition, alcohol prohibition, and they would take it to bars, speakeasies and illegal hotel bars and that sort of stuff and sell it to them. And they would then be able to extort money from those people if they wanted to. So that basic bootlegging and extortion and standover really hasn't altered in a century. What's altered is the tactics, the methods of doing the punishing and the methods of sorting out who to send. Those days, in the old days, a large man with a fedora hat and a pinstripe suit and possibly a Tommy gun in a violin case would walk in and, start shooting up the joint, shoot the lights out, as they say. These days, as you've just explained, they sub it out to some young guys wearing hoodies, runners, masks, and they go to Bunnings and get a red jerry can, it seems to be. Red plastic jerry can seems to be the thing. And they fill it full of petrol that's now quite expensive, at around the $1.80 mark a litre, and then they go down and burn the place or do some other things as well. So really the big picture of extortion hasn't changed, but the methods of doing it, as somebody mentioned to me the other day, it looks like something out of Batman. You know, when you see this footage of these dark figures doing all this encrypted stuff, it really is like something out of a dystopian film, isn't it? Horror movie stuff, which makes it very, very eye-catching.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you make that comparison to the Prohibition era, because one of the pub and bar insiders that one of our colleagues spoke to described it exactly as that. And one of the key differences, as you mentioned, a lot of it is the same. The message is the same, but we're seeing it in the middle of Melbourne CBD, where even during the tobacco wars, for example, it was a lot more suburban. The properties were more spread out, but here it's happening in the middle of South Bank. The kids who are doing it don't care. They've been filmed doing it. They're running through busy streets, really dense streets as well, you know, high rises surrounding all of these restaurants and bars. And the other really interesting thing here, and the really concerning thing, is that a lot of these kids are not seasoned offenders. They're coming in through the court, and their very first charge will be arson, endangering life. You know, the judges are saying that this could have killed someone. Well, the police don't want them on the streets because they're saying that the offence was so serious, you know, someone could have died. But they don't have criminal records, as you mentioned. You know, they're teenagers, they rock up in hoodies, they've been seen at petrol stations filling up those red jerry cans, and then they just toss them on the street and run off. So they're not seasoned criminals. Is
there not an argument, if you were, say, advising the Chief Commissioner, which you're not, but you could be, to say any service station owner that sees people, you know, underage people or young people or people wearing hoodies, you know, obviously not some suburban granddad filling up his little thing to put in his lawnmower, you know, it's different. If they're going around at night filling up red jerry cans and then screeching out of the place in what looks like a stolen Mercedes or whatever, perhaps they shouldn't be selling them fuel.
Yeah, well, they stick out like sore thumbs. You know, what 15-year-old needs fuel in the middle of a fuel crisis? So we have seen cases where they've called the police pretty quickly because the kids are just speeding up there, you know, filling up the jerry can and then racing off, and people thankfully are going, well, that doesn't look right. So they do alert police.
They do, at least trying to head them off early doors.
The kids try to run away, but they have been caught up with a few times now.
I guess if they bolt without paying, well, that alone is a red flag.
It's a crime anyway. It's a crime in itself.
It's a crime anyway, a red flag for a red jerry can. Now, we know that the tobacco wars model that's been going on since 2023 roughly, there's been something like 150 arsons and about $70 million worth of damage in that time. But let's say in the last month, we've had, I think it's more than 20 arsons just in this late rash of bar wars, and it seems to be multiplying.
Well, it's concerning enough that we've had, as you said, nearly 24 arsons now, I would say, and enough for police to create a task force dedicated to stamping it out. It's
actually started with much more of a flurry than the tobacco thing did. The tobacco thing sort of gathered strength. One here, one there, one here, one there. But this has just gone bang, as if somebody somewhere sat back and said, right, let's go.
Yeah, well, criminals aren't the only ones using the tobacco wars as a blueprint. You know, the police told us last week that they've hit the ground running because they've seen this type of thing before. And I think to tell you how seriously they are taking it, they compared the amount of resources and the number of investigators thrown at this thing to the amount of police that they allocated to investigating the search for Desi Freeman. So they take it really seriously. They want to stamp it out as quickly as they can.
This will be ancient history to you because it is ancient history, but to underline how dangerous this is, how the potential for danger is awful, one of the most terrible things that happened in the last century in Australia, in a civil sense, was the Whiskey A Go-Go firebombing in Brisbane, in Fortitude Valley, in the early hours of, I think, a day in March in 1973, and it was a standover thing. That was gangsters wanting to stand over nightclubs in Brisbane. they may or may not have been colluding with very corrupt and evil police, interestingly. But regardless, they were waited for this Whiskey A Go-Go place in Fortitude Valley to fill up after midnight. It was upstairs. I'm pointing into the air, which is hopeless on a podcast, but that's what I'm doing. I'm pointing up at a floor above, which in the Whiskey A Go-Go was where all the people were. And what these crooks did was roll 2 drums, I think, drums like these. We're talking 20-litre drums of petrol into the foyer down below and set a light to them, open them, slosh the stuff out, set a light to it, and up it went like a bomb. Now, those people upstairs were doomed, many of them. 15 people died and many more were injured as they tried to escape the heat, the smoke, the whole thing. 15 died. It was just awful and one of the worst crimes in Australian history in many ways. Pre-Port Arthur, it was one of the really bad ones. Eventually, they got a couple of crooks who were crooks and they were locked up for it and they denied it bitterly and there were massive protests and things. I think eventually one of the guys that was convicted for it was sent back to England at the end of his sentence and he ultimately admitted that he'd done it. It was very weird business. But I think it involved corrupt police and it might have been corrupt Sydney and Brisbane police. It was a very bad thing. What we've seen in Melbourne has the potential to do that. The other parallel, and the other thing that underlines the danger of it, is the Childers backpacker fire. In the year 2000, some lunatic who'd been kicked out of a backpacker hostel at the Queensland town of Childers went back in, lit the joint up. It killed, would you believe, 15 backpackers and injured many more. Again, fire, simple act of lighting a fire, probably with some accelerant. He might have had a bottle of, methylated spirits or whatever he had, possibly Bundaberg rum. And that killed another 15 people. It is only a matter of time, if this continues, before we see that happen right here in Melbourne, that there'll be a nightclub where people die.
Well, one of them has already been shot at with people inside and, again, with the tobacco wars, people have died. Arsonists died.
Yeah.
They've been seriously burned. A poor innocent woman was killed because...
Katie Tangi.
That's right, because 2 arsonists got the wrong address and she was just house sitting for her brother while he was on his honeymoon.
Katie Tangi out at Truganina. She's house sitting for her brother-in-law who was on his honeymoon in Bali or wherever he was, or Thailand or somewhere. And she's innocently home there at her brother's house with her dog, I think. And the place gets lit up like a Christmas tree. She's upstairs. Upstairs is bad. She had no chance of getting out and she died. It was dreadful, terrible thing. And this is what they're dicing with. This is what they're willing to do. It is one of the most serious affronts to law and order that I can remember happening in Australia, not just this state, because it verges on anarchy. It's verging on anarchy. If 5 of these happened at once in this city, and who's to say it won't, where, fire trucks, police, could they cope with it? Could the emergency services actually cope with a big number of these happening in 1 hour? It could lead to very bad results. And I think it's hard to overemphasise how serious this is. We tend to sit back and see it as a bit of a spectator sport, and it's happening to, these bars and, what's going on there really. But the meat in the sandwich here is the public, people walking past. It blows up, flying glass comes out and cuts somebody's head off, spears them in the face, whatever. I mean, it's just awful. Shooting bullets as they fly past, what could go wrong? Only everything. It is a shocking state of affairs. Now, Olivia, we are speculating at all times. So these are not facts we're dealing in so much as guesstimates or informed guesses, educated guesses. In my case, uneducated guesses. But it does seem possible that with the current situation with the war in Iran, which is stopping shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz, that the tobacco smuggling routes have been curtailed. The cheap tobacco is not getting to Australia, let's say, and that the criminal cartels that are making millions upon millions out of tobacco, or have been, might have switched their attention to another form of contraband, which is illegally distilled spirits, which I think can be distilled much closer to home, if not in the Asian countries near us, than right here on Australian soil. Not that hard to make bad spirits.
And not that hard to get around Melbourne either.
Not hard to get.
We sent one of our colleagues out to different, bottle shops and everything.
The ones that say cheap booze here. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
All sorts of levels of different pours, no standard drinks, blurry labels that aren't stuck on properly, wine, spirits, you name it. It's really easy to get your hands on it, whether it's being made in Melbourne or somewhere else in Australia, or as you said, maybe brought over from somewhere that's closer to home than the Middle East, for example. You can get it everywhere. So,
criminal enterprises, they don't care. Money and water just flow wherever it takes them. It follows the gravity. And they don't care what they deal in as long as they make money out of it. And if it's going to be spirits, well, it'll be spirits, alcohol, liquor.
And I think there might be a bit of a sense that it's a somewhat victimless crime. The arsons and those sort of brazen attacks aside, I think it's harder for people to sympathise with the government missing out on excise and tax because you're not dealing with human life when you're talking about that. But of course, it's illegal and it's unregulated and it's dangerous because you ultimately don't know what is going into that product. Same with, illegal chop shop. It's the same as alcohol. You don't know what's in it. You don't know what it's made up of, but it's really easy to get and it is a lot cheaper than the regulated stuff that you would buy on a night out or at a national chain of a bottle shop of a particular brand.
Now, we don't want to rake over sad stories too much, but we know that 2 Melbourne girls were among a group of young people who died in Laos nearly 2 years ago, because they inadvertently drank, an illicitly made spirit, which was actually poison, toxic, methanol stuff. And it's deadly and it killed not just those 2 girls, but others as well from around the world, which underlines that this is not ultimately victimless, that if this stuff is sold here in any quantities, that it's very dangerous. And, I've just finished writing a story with Mark Butler, our colleague, which points out that this crime has potential to kill people at both ends. One is the fires, as we've just been through, and the other is when you actually drink the spirits. It's really bad news either end. There's no happy endings in this, and to allow the bad guys to get away with it will only encourage them to do more and more things that are more and more dangerous. So there's great pressure on the police to come to grips with it, which must be very hard because the technology that they use, in this case it would appear as being matched by the technology that the crooks are using. It's maybe fair to say that for a couple of decades the police have probably, or maybe more than a couple of decades, the police have had the technological edge on crooks, but now maybe because technology is being produced more cheaply and you can buy it on a black market, some of it, that the crooks are catching up. And so now we've got kids with those, let's call them gadgets, electronic gadgets, that they can steal almost any car they like, whereas 10 years ago they couldn't. It was hard for them to get them. They can jam Wi-Fi frequencies. They can do all sorts of stuff. We saw on Four Corners recently, the very good program Four Corners, it's on the ABC, very good show. It showed us that crooks with the right gear can work out if police with tasers are walking past. Well, of course, that tells them that there are police in the vicinity.
Just with Bluetooth?
With Bluetooth, it's so easy for them that they've now got this gear. Suddenly, they've got this gear that are basically no more tricky than walking around with a mobile phone. So they can steal cars, they can jam frequencies, they can tell you if police are in the vicinity and how many. Now, this is pretty scary stuff. Olivia, someone out there has dubbed the bad guys in this the ghost, which is a great generic catch-all term for the unknown bad guys or bad guy. I'm asking you because you cover crime in and day out. Do you feel that there's an argument that he's one person or one body of people doing this, or perhaps we've got a situation where we've got a major mover and some copycats?
The working theory, with everyone that we've spoken to, whether it's a pub and bar owner or someone maybe, with more links to the underworld, is that no one seems to really know who is behind it. And that's why this group or groups or, people, whatever, have been called the ghost because it's just a rumour mill that's in overdrive. They can't tell if it's one group making multiple demands or, as you said, if it is one group sort of doing that in one aspect, but then you've got copycats who are sort of flying under that cover and hoping they'll fly under the radar because of that. There's also just a few different theories, whether it is the illegal alcohol, is it drugs, is it money laundering, is it whatever? Are there multiple things happening at once here? And no one seems to know, which is the tricky part about this. We knew what was happening with tobacco, but we don't know what's happening truly with this just yet.
Yeah, there's all sorts of possibilities. You know, if it is money laundering outlets, then maybe, you know, somebody who knows a lot about that might be trying to bowl over the money laundering outlets of his or their enemies.
Yeah, and the reason I sort of say, oh, it could be this or it could be that is because the list of venues now that's been hit or that are on a, you know, potential hit list of places to be targeted is so broad that there isn't one theme that truly connects them all together. You've got, you know, Francois, the French restaurant. You've got Bar Bambi in the middle of the CBD. You've got Kitten Strip Club in South Melbourne, the George Hotel, which is 2 blocks up from that. They're all very different businesses.
They are.
And you've got brothels that have been hit too. So there's just not one common theme between all of them that connects them that we can see just yet.
The police must be having a really hard look at the ownership and management structures of all those places to see if they can find any unifying thread.
Yeah, and there's so many moving parts to these businesses too. There's, as you say, the owners, but then, you know, clubs have promoters. They have organisers of particular nights on a Friday, Saturday. You need security for those nights. You need suppliers for alcohol.
Yeah,
you need venues to be licensed. Are they unlicensed? There's so many bits.
There's false fronts. The licensees aren't necessarily the people doing the business, and the people doing the business are hiding behind somebody else and so on and so on. Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I've heard it said that money laundering is carried out in many different ways, one of them being car washes and, you know, motels, and were a classic of the old-time mafia. By the motel that's not doing that well, and then they feed black cash through the till and say, oh, yeah, we didn't just have 2 rooms rented out last night, we had 12 rooms rented out last night. Well, no one knows if it is or it isn't. The money goes through the till, it goes through the books, and it looks like a legitimate enterprise. And, of course, at the end of 2 years, they can then show those books to a prospective buyer who goes, oh, good, this is a really good motel. I'll buy it. And, of course, it's all fake. It's a hotel without any guests, really. And some poor mug buys the place. Meanwhile, the mafia have been, you know, laundering all this cash through it. And when the buyer goes broke, legitimate ma and pa kettle go broke, they have to sell it again and the mafia can buy it back for a song. All these things are relevant in that some of these businesses might be just fronts for money laundering. And as such, it might not necessarily be about the illicit alcohol, or not only the illicit alcohol. That could be just part of a big Rubik's Cube of moving parts, as you said. It's complex, and I'm hoping that some of the police force's finest brains are working on it, and that maybe there's people from, you know, that have a good financial acumen, perhaps fraud squad people, forensic accountants might be good. There might be more value in them for this than the classic, you know, flat-footed police work. Maybe. What do you think?
Time will tell, I think.
Olivia, what do you make of this message that has been received by at least one of these venues? You've got the words to it. Could you read it out to us and tell us what you think about it? Because it's quite mysterious.
Yeah, this has been sent to a few business owners now, and it's from a group that is calling themselves the cartel. So on one hand, you've got the cartel, and then you've got what we've been talking about, the ghost. But the cartel sent this message probably this time last week to a few owners, and it says, hello, if you got this message, we're after you, your family, your businesses, homes and souls. We will take it by force if you don't comply. The police can't help you. It's inevitable. We won't stop till we get what we want. Thank you.
Part of it makes you wonder if it's genuine, whether that's somebody just playing with people. It's threatening, and yet it's so sort of florid and purple and over the top, and the thing about souls. What does that mean? And they're not actually asking for anything, are they?
That's the weird thing. There's no specific demand here. There's no amount listed for anything here. It's also a bit strange that the number appears to be from the United States, whether that's real or whether it's, been disguised in some way or diverted through however.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that would work, but it is interesting that it does look like it's come from the US and that there is no specific demand, because then why else would you set a venue on fire or fire bullets into it if someone hasn't done what you want, but you haven't told them what you want?
It's so cheap to employ these, probably $1,000 gets you an arson. This is how
you can get it for as little as $500.
I mean,
if the kid is young enough, it's between $500 to $1,000.
It's not a lot of money. So if there were people elsewhere who just want to make mischief for their own reasons, maybe cultural reasons, maybe religious reasons, maybe they've got a grievance against X, Y or Z, maybe they hate alcohol. I don't know. Would this not be a way to do it? Because it doesn't cost them much. They can send messages and then send kids with jerry cans and sit back and laugh and look at it for no other reason than to do it, just for the sheer devilment of doing it, as opposed to actual standover and extortion. And is real standover and extortion hiding behind these people or vice versa?
Or either way, it's sending a message.
Sending a message. It's very intriguing. And that raises the possibility, is this some sort of religious crusade? Is some weirdo gangster running his own religious crusade against alcohol? If that were so, it would be likely to originate from the Middle East, you'd think, and be a Muslim anti-alcohol thing, not alcoholic. It really is very puzzling. No one can work out the motives necessarily. And as we go to air with this, it's still a mystery. That gives us a situation report on what's happening in Melbourne at this point, and this point is early May. Thanks for joining us, Olivia, because you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Melbourne day to day. You've covered this story day in, day out, as you did with the tobacco wars. And so it's always good to hear your thoughts about these things. Thanks for joining Life and Crimes once more.
Thanks for having me, and hopefully next time I have some answers for you about this one.
Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is Jonty Burton. For my columns, features and more, go to heraldsun.com.au/Andrew Rule, one word. For advertising inquiries, go to newspodcastssold@news.com.au. That is all one word, newspodcastssold. And if you want further information about this episode, links are in the description.